Now with Israel, the thing that they need from us more than anything is just to say we support their right to defend themselves to the hilt. We'll do that in public and private. We're not going to try to undercut that. We understand that when you have a terrorist group like Hamas that wants a second Holocaust, that you can't just sit there and allow that to happen. I mean, we would never accept anything like that in this country, any threat like that. So they have a right to end the threat once and for all. What Biden's doing, I mean, he's in a political situation where he's got his rabid base hates Israel now. And you got people like the Squad who are very much anti-Israel because they view it's kooky leftism, somewhat woke stuff. It just goes in and the way they don't see reality, I think, like you should. So for example, on these college campuses, you have these kids protesting in favor of Hamas terrorists. Really? Like, that's what you want to do, to say that this is good? And I think some of it's just ignorance. I mean, some of these kids on college campuses will say Israel is a colonial power, that they're occupying territory. I'm thinking to myself, wait a minute. Open up a Bible, go over there, and all those lands, Judea, Samaria, the areas where they say are, quote, occupied, those are like the most ancient and historic Jewish lands that there are. The connection between Jewish people and those lands go back thousands and thousands of years. So the Jews were displaced by people coming in over many years. And then when they came, when they started to resettle more with the Zionist movement in the 1800s into the Balfour Declaration and all the things that happened after the First World War, leading into the Second World War, then post the Holocaust, the United Nations did a partition plan in the late 40s, a Jewish state and an Arab state. Israel accepted the partition, even though that was not all the land that historically had been theirs. The Arabs rejected the partition. They chose to go to war to try to annihilate the Jewish state in the Crib. They lost that war. Then in 1967, the Arab neighboring Arab countries were preparing to invade Israel. Israel preempted that in the Six-Day War and won. Then in 1973, Arab armies launched a war on Yom Kippur, and Israel won that war. And then in the 80s and part of the 90s and beyond, you had intifadas, where there were waves of terror attacks. So in every single time, Israel was willing to accept a partition. The Palestinian Arabs were not, and the reason is the Palestinian Arabs ultimately, they don't even want their own state as much as they want to get rid of the Jewish state. They don't recognize Israel's right to exist as a Jewish state, and so their ultimate goal is the destruction of Israel. They don't want two states side by side in perpetuity. When Yasser Arafat founded the Palestine Liberation Organization, people think that, because they talk about, quote, occupied territories, that's from the end of the 67 war. Israel took control over Judea and Samaria and Gaza. The Palestine Liberation Organization, and so people would say those are occupied. Now, they're not occupied, they're disputed because of the history that I mentioned to you, but they would say, like, oh, this is occupied. But the PLO was founded before the Six-Day War in 1964. So what are they talking about liberating? They're talking about liberating Israel proper from 1948. So that means they want no Israel. And that's been the goal from the beginning. So that's why, like, I opposed the U.S. trying to pressure Israel to do a so-called two-state solution. Because if they don't accept Israel's right to exist as a Jewish state, then basically a two-state agreement would just be a stepping stone to the destruction of Israel. Because you'd end up, if you're a state, you have the right to militarize and have that. So that would be not. So we're not going to be able to count as that. So yes, we will be supportive. And we also got to look at these groups like the United Nations. You know, Donald Trump funded it. Nikki Haley supports funding it. I think we should defund the United Nations. Your tax dollars should not be going to fund this corrupt organization. It's a rogues gallery of people. It's anti-Semitic. They couldn't even condemn the Hamas terrorist attacks. So we got to start getting smarter here. So we are going to hold the UN accountable. We're going to hold all these international groups accountable.